was 11 or 12 years old. It was hanging together with the fact that I knew I was.
A child learns to smile before they learn to cry. They carry burdens too heavy for small shoulders, pretending strength while innocence slips quietly away. Years later, the body has grown, but inside there's an echo, hollow, restless, searching. When childhood is rushed, the spirit bends in ways that leave lasting marks. The laughter feels distant, trust becomes fragile, and the soul learns survival before joy. Growing up too fast doesn't just steal time, it rewires the heart, reshapes the way love is felt, and leaves a shadow where light was meant to be. The consequences linger long after the years have passed. The shattered season of childhood. There are children whose seasons end too quickly, not because of a catastrophe announced in headlines, but in the quieter ways, when laughter is replaced with watchfulness, when toys sit untouched because there is something heavier to carry. A childhood cut short rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It can appear almost ordinary, yet for the one living it, time bends, and the soil of innocence is cracked before it blooms. You can sense it in their eyes. They're too alert, too knowing, as though they have already walked roads others their age cannot even imagine. Some become caretakers for siblings while their parents disappear into work or worry. Others learn to soothe tempers that should never have been theirs to tame, and some simply hold silence, swallowing fear, sadness, or longing so that the household can keep breathing. What should have been a season of exploration becomes a rehearsal for endurance. The Greek story of Persephone echoes here. She was not ready when the earth opened and Hades carried her into the underworld. Her descent was sudden, a stripping away of light. Children who grow up too fast live a version of that myth, except the underworld is not beneath the ground. It is within the home, within the invisible rules they're forced to obey. Like Persephone, they are pulled away before they understand what they're leaving behind, and the springtime of their being is shortened. Carl Jung once spoke of the wounded child that lives in the psyche. He saw it not as a weakness, but as a place where both the fracture and the possibility of healing reside. The child who grows up too fast carries this archetype within, a tender place that never fully matures, no matter how strong the outer self appears. It is a paradox, wounded yet watchful, broken yet awake. Such children often learn to wear masks. To the world they may appear composed, precocious, perhaps even admirable. Teachers praise their maturity. Strangers admire their independence. Few realize that beneath that polish is a spirit that had to trade wonder for vigilance. The games of make-believe, the careless running, the simple safety of being held, these do not vanish entirely, but they live like shadows in the memory, haunting moments of adulthood with whispers of what was missed. Inside, though, the story runs differently. The child who grows up too fast often feels like a stranger to themselves, too old for the playground, yet too young for the burdens pressed upon them. They move between worlds without belonging to either, carrying an inner exile that can follow them long after the outer circumstances change. Spiritually, the loss of this season alters the way the world is seen. Where others encounter trust, they may find suspicion. Where others meet life as an open field, they walk as though every path hides thorns. And yet there is also a strange gift hidden in the fracture. To grow up too fast is to glimpse truths too early. The fragility of adults, the impermanence of safety, the hidden language of pain. It sharpens perception. It plants seeds of empathy. It forces the soul to ask questions long before it is ready to answer them. These gifts, however, are double-edged. The same sharpness that notices everything can make rest almost impossible. The same empathy that reads the room can drown the spirit in sorrows that aren't theirs to hold. Without guidance, these early awakenings can feel less like blessings, and more like weights that keep the heart from breathing freely. But the cost remains. To adapt before one has been allowed to simply be means living with a hunger that no success can fully satisfy. It is the hunger for a season that should have lasted longer, for the carefree breath that was never taken. Even in moments of joy, there can be a quiet undertow, a reminder that something essential was borrowed from the future and spent too soon. What does it mean then for a soul to grow in soil that was never soft enough for play? What happens to the spirit when childhood is not a meadow, but a battleground of small invisible wars, What happens to a soul that learns to adapt before it learns to simply be? The burden of becoming the parent. Strength can be a strange inheritance. When a child begins holding responsibilities meant for older hands, that strength develops quickly, almost unnaturally. They know how to cook dinner before they know how to ride a bike. They learn to calm tempers in the living room before they understand their own. What looks like resilience is often an invisible reshaping of the spirit, an early exchange where softness is traded for survival. There are countless ways this role reversal begins. Sometimes it's the child waking a younger sibling for school each morning. Sometimes it's sitting at the edge of a bed, listening to a parent's tears that should have been spared from young ears. In other households, the child carries silence, holding secrets like locked boxes that weigh more with every passing year. To step into such roles feels natural in the moment, but the soul keeps a record of every burden it was asked to carry too soon. In Taoist thought, the dance of yin and yang is meant to flow, each side rising and falling in harmony. For the child who becomes the parent, the flow is interrupted. Yin, softness, receptivity, play, never gets its full expression. Yang, action, responsibility, control, becomes overgrown, crowding out the balance. Outwardly it may look like strength, but inwardly, the imbalance creates a tension that never fully settles. The child grows up always leaning too far in one direction, always compensating for something unseen. That early tilt shapes their choices later, pulling them toward roles of control, leadership, or quiet endurance. Even when their spirit longs for softness it cannot name. An African tale speaks of a boy who became the elder before the elders. His wisdom was admired, his counsel sought, though his years were few. Yet when the village celebrated with song and dance, he remained quiet at the edge of the circle, unable to enter. The story reminds us that wisdom gained too early often comes with a hidden exile, the inability to join in the very life one seems so ready to guide. Such children stand both within and outside their world, praised for strength, but never truly free. Admiration from others rarely soothes the ache of missing what was never lived, and so the child grows celebrated on the outside while aching in secret within. The hidden cost is subtle. While these children gain control over their environment, they often lose the simple trust that someone else will take care of them. They carry the unspoken belief that to let go is dangerous, that surrender means disaster. This can ripple into adulthood, where rest feels suspicious and asking for help feels like weakness. The soul, taught to be the caretaker, forgets how to be cared for. This hidden belief becomes a silent law inside them. No one will protect me unless I protect myself. Yet within this burden lies a peculiar radiance. The child who becomes the parent often develops a rare ability to read moods, to sense unspoken needs, to stabilize storms before they erupt. It is as if their spirit grew antennae, reaching outward to protect the fragile balance of their home. Such gifts can later blossom into healing work, artistry, or leadership. But the danger is that the self becomes secondary, always tuned to others, never fully listening to its own voice. When the softness of childhood is suppressed, tenderness doesn't disappear, it hides. It waits behind the armor, searching for moments when it can slip through. In a sudden tear during music, in a trembling pause during intimacy, in the ache that surfaces when they finally meet someone who offers real safety. The imbalance of yin and yang is never absolute. Even in the most hardened heart, the missing piece continues to call. Some carry this imbalance quietly their whole lives, never realizing why joy feels heavy or why success feels incomplete. Others are forced to confront it when the old strategies stop working, when exhaustion breaks through the armor. In those moments, the question arises, how can a soul that was trained to parent so early learn to nurture itself? And when strength takes root too early, it often grows into a self-sufficiency that hardens into armor, waiting for its story to be told. The armor of self-sufficiency. There is a certain kind of strength that grows not from choice but from necessity. When responsibility becomes the air a child breathes, they learn quickly that relying on others is dangerous, sometimes even impossible. Out of this grows a silent vow. I will stand on my own. That vow becomes the foundation of an invisible armor, forged long before the child even understands what armor means. The armor looks admirable from the outside. These are the people who seem unshakable, who manage their lives without leaning too heavily on anyone else. They are praised for independence, admired for resilience. and sometimes even envied for their self-sufficiency. Yet hidden beneath the admiration is a truth rarely spoken. The armor was never built for pride, but for protection. Every piece was hammered out of fear that if they leaned on others, the ground would collapse beneath them. In adulthood, that vow hardens. Self-sufficiency becomes not just a skill, but an identity. Asking for help feels unbearable, like exposing a wound that has always been kept carefully covered. Accepting love can feel threatening, as if surrender means handing someone the power to destroy. What began as survival becomes habit, and what began as habit becomes personality. And so, the armor clings, even when life no longer demands it. Inside the armor, there is often a quiet exhaustion. To be strong every day without pause drains the spirit in ways that are invisible to others. The world may see confidence, but beneath the surface lies a constant vigilance, a nervous system that never truly rests. Psychological studies have called this hyper-independence a trauma response. It is the nervous system remembering too much, staying prepared for the collapse that might never come again. The body keeps tension like a shield, the mind rehearses scenarios where trust will fail, and the heart, though longing for connection, keeps its distance. This defense is intelligent. It once kept the child alive. But intelligence born of pain often lingers long after the danger has passed. The Sufi mystic Rumi once wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The armor of self-sufficiency is built to hide that wound, to keep the light out along with the hurt. Yet paradoxically, the very crack they try to cover is also the doorway to their deepest transformation. If the armor never loosens, the light cannot reach them, and so they walk through life carrying both strength and loneliness, waiting for a moment when it feels safe enough to finally put the shield down. Sometimes the armor isolates in ways even they don't see. Intimacy can feel suffocating. Partnerships may fail, not from lack of love, but from the inability to truly let love in. Friendships remain shallow, work becomes the refuge, and solitude becomes both sanctuary and cage. The soul that once adapted by closing its doors forgets how to open them again, and slowly, the armor that once saved them becomes the very thing that starves them. Relationships under this pattern often become one-sided, with the armored soul giving endlessly but struggling to receive. Love becomes service, connection becomes duty, and the deeper need to be vulnerable remains unmet. This imbalance quietly erodes intimacy, leaving both people feeling unseen in different ways. Still, within this struggle lies a strange beauty. The self-sufficient spirit often holds a deep reservoir of resourcefulness, creativity, and determination. They know how to endure storms, they know how to build from nothing, they know how to carry the weight others cannot. But strength without surrender is incomplete, like a bird that never learns to land. The spiritual task becomes not destroying the armor, but learning when to set it aside. There are moments when cracks appear. It may be in the presence of someone whose patience softens their edges. It may come during a breakdown, when the weight can no longer be carried alone, or it may rise in stillness when the soul whispers that survival is no longer enough. In those moments, the armor loosens, and the possibility of light, trust, and connection slips through. Yet even the smallest crack in the armor can feel terrifying because it means letting the world touch the very place they once swore to protect. The question that remains is simple yet unsettling. What happens when armor becomes not protection, but prison? The forgotten language of play. Play is more than amusement. It is the first language of the soul, a way children learn the rhythm of the world without needing instruction. To build forts, to chase shadows, to laugh without reason, these are not trivial acts. They are early prayers, wordless offerings that say, "I belong to life, and life belongs to me." When that language is silenced too soon, something subtle but profound is lost. The silence begins gradually. Responsibilities crowd out games, worries replace daydreams, and imagination is traded for watchfulness. A child who once turned sticks into swords and clouds into castles suddenly learns that fantasy is unsafe. They rehearse survival instead of wonder, and once the imagination closes, the ability to dream with it begins to close as well. When play is silenced, a child doesn't just lose laughter, they lose the natural language of showing themselves without fear. Every game they didn't play becomes a small secret, every skipped moment of silliness a lesson in hiding softness. Over time, this teaches the heart that vulnerability is dangerous, and so the world is met with guarded eyes instead of wide, curious ones. Indigenous Lakota teachings speak of play as sacred, not optional. In their understanding, children carry the medicine of joy for the entire community. When they laugh, the world is blessed. When they run freely, the earth feels lighter. To take away a child's play is not just to silence them, but to rob the whole circle of its vitality. Yet children who grow up too fast are often asked to lay down this medicine before they even understand its power. Without play, creativity dims. Adults who never had room for it may excel in structure, but they often struggle to create something new. Their souls may ache with an unnamed hunger, for invention and joy are not luxuries, they are necessities of the spirit. Play is where intuition is rehearsed, where imagination stretches its wings, where possibility is first recognized as a friend. Strip it away, and the adult walks into life carrying the ache of an unopened gift. Nietzsche, in A Spoke Zarathustra, described the child as the highest stage of spirit. Beyond the camel that bears burdens and the lion that learns to say no, the child is renewal, innocence, and playfulness fused into power. It creates without needing a reason. But for those who grew old too quickly, that stage is often delayed or distorted. They may reach for the child within only later in life, after years of exhaustion, when the soul finally remembers it was meant for more than endurance. Memories of play sometimes return unexpectedly. An adult may find themselves laughing too loudly at something small, or losing themselves in a moment of wonder they cannot explain. These glimpses are not accidents. They are reminders that the forgotten language still lingers, waiting patiently to be spoken again. Even after decades, the spirit never forgets what it means to dance freely, to build something pointless and beautiful, to play for the sake of play. At times, the spark doesn't return by itself but is carried in the presence of others. A circle of friends, a gathering that celebrates joy, or even witnessing the unself-conscious laughter of children can stir something long buried. Community becomes a mirror that reminds the soul it was never meant to carry life's weight in silence. That joy, like grief, is a shared inheritance. When play disappears, only shadows are left behind. Where there should be lightness, there can be rigidity. Where there should be curiosity, there can be fear of being foolish. Many who lost play early carry an invisible cage, unable to loosen enough to taste joy without suspicion. The armor they wear keeps them safe, but it also keeps them from ever tumbling into the spontaneity that makes life feel alive. There is something holy about play that transcends the child who laughs. In those moments of abandon, the soul brushes against eternity, tasting freedom without condition. The divine often hides in simplicity, and it is through the unguarded rhythm of play that the spirit remembers. It was made not just to endure, but to dance. Though distant, the path to play is still there. It often begins in small ways, through music, through art, through moments where seriousness cracks and laughter breaks through. The forgotten child stirs whenever the adult allows themselves to be vulnerable enough to appear silly, unguarded, or light-hearted. Each moment of play, no matter how brief, is a form of healing, a return to the sacred rhythm that was interrupted. The silence of play creates another silence, an emotional one, where feelings remain hidden beneath survival. The silence, beneath the surface. The loss of play leaves behind not only absence, but a hush that seeps into every corner of life. A child who grows up too soon learns quickly that some feelings are too heavy, too dangerous, or too useless to show, and so the tongue holds them back, the body absorbs them, and silence becomes both shield and second skin. That silence is not empty. It vibrates, like the hum of an unstruck string, resonating with everything that was never spoken. Over the years it collects. The swallowed cries, the hidden fears, the laughter cut short. They do not vanish. They gather beneath the surface, a quiet reservoir waiting to overflow in moments the adult does not expect. Buddhist teaching calls this dukkha, the suffering that lingers when life's wounds are endured but not voiced. It is not the explosive grief that brings collapse, but the steady ache of carrying what should have been shared. This quiet ache bends the spirit in subtle ways, teaching it to walk carefully, to measure emotions, to live always in restraint. There is, however, a strange beauty to this endurance. In Japan, poets spoke of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness that all things pass, It is the tender ache felt when cherry blossoms scatter in the wind, beautiful because they cannot stay. In the same way, the unspoken sadness of those who grew up too fast carries its own fragile grace. They see impermanence more clearly, they feel the fleeting nature of joy more keenly, and so their hearts may recognize beauty where others glance past it. Alone, beauty cannot awaken what has been buried. When silence becomes too deep, it begins to press against the walls of the soul. It searches for cracks, for doorways, for ways to emerge. For some, this release comes in art, the brushstroke that carries sorrow without words, the melody that aches with what the voice cannot confess. For others, it rises as sudden tears, a breakdown that seems to appear from nowhere, or a dream that startles them awake with forgotten grief. Outwardly, they may appear calm, even wise. People might admire their composure, their ability to hold space when others crumble. But what is often unseen is the cost of that stillness. To stay unshaken means never fully surrendering, never fully trusting that someone else could carry even a fraction of what they hold within. Silence, in this way, becomes both their power and their prison. In relationships, this muting often creates invisible walls. Words of affection may be given, but the raw undercurrent, the trembling need to be held, the unspoken fears, remain sealed away. The partner may feel distance without knowing why, sensing that a whole inner world exists just beyond reach. The paradox is striking. The very wound that once silenced them sharpens their sensitivity to the world around them. They can hear the words that remain unsaid in a conversation, feel the tremor of emotion hidden behind a smile, sense the heaviness in a room without anyone naming it. In carrying their own unspoken grief, they develop an uncanny capacity to recognize it in others. But sensitivity does not erase the longing. Beneath the still surface lies the yearning to be known without disguise, and that yearning, when unmet, becomes another silence layered upon the first. Intimacy falters here, because the most vulnerable truths, the tears, the fears, the rawness, remain locked away, protected by walls that have stood for decades. Some traditions suggest that silence itself can be a teacher, and perhaps it is. It teaches patience, teaches listening, and teaches humility in the face of what cannot be controlled. But silence untended can also curdle into loneliness, leaving the soul estranged not just from others, but from itself. The child who learned not to cry may one day find it difficult even to weep in private, unsure how to release the dam without breaking completely. Within the limits, a peculiar devotion quietly endures. The one who carries silence often becomes deeply attuned to mystery itself, sensing the sacred in pauses, in breaths, in shadows where nothing is said. For them, silence can feel less like emptiness and more like the place where the divine leans close. Once silence begins to move, a doorway unfolds before the soul, impossible to dismiss. The awakening of shadow gifts. From silence, strange blossoms often grow. What begins as a wound, what begins as loss, sometimes twists into a perception that others cannot see. The child who once held their breath to survive becomes the adult who notices every shift in the air, every flicker of expression on another's face. What was once heaviness begins to change shape. Such awareness is first born not from magic but necessity. A child may learn to read the smallest cues to stay safe, to anticipate moods before they explode. What began as protection later sharpens into intuition, a skill that can move beyond fear and become a doorway into insight. Sensitivity in these lives is not weakness but radar. It allows them to walk into a room and feel the mood before words are spoken. They read the invisible languages, tension in shoulders, hesitation in voices, the slight tremor in someone's hand. While others pass by unaware, they perceive what is hidden, and this awareness can become a gift. Carl Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the archetype born from pain who learns to guide others through what they themselves have endured. It is not theoretical knowledge but embodied knowing, wisdom written into the bones. Those who are silenced as children often grow into adults who can hear the silence in others and hold it with care. Their own suffering becomes the lantern they carry for those still lost in the dark. In many shamanic traditions, this very path is revered. Illness, crisis, or early suffering is not seen as misfortune alone, but as initiation. The shaman-to-be falls apart, loses their bearings, and from the fracture emerges vision. They are taught that to descend into shadow is to receive sight that others cannot bear. What nearly destroyed them becomes the ground of their calling. But not every gift feels like a blessing at first. To feel so deeply can also be exhausting. Empathy without boundaries leads to overwhelm. Intuition without guidance feels like a burden. They may wonder if their sensitivity is a curse rather than a gift, if they are fated always to carry more than others. And yet, with time, these same qualities, when refined, become instruments of healing, insight, and deep connection. The transformation is never instant. It often begins with small recognitions, realizing a dream held meaning, sensing that an intuition was right, noticing how a gentle word brought someone comfort. Slowly, the individual begins to trust what once felt like fragility. The shadow they carried begins to reveal its strange light. Across traditions, this shift is often described as a thinning of veils. Dreams may feel more vivid, synchronicities more frequent, moments of déjà vu more charged with meaning. What once felt like private strangeness slowly unfolds as a language of the unseen, teaching that pain not only breaks but also opens. There is a certain danger, though, in identifying too much with the role of healer or seer. If every wound must become medicine, the person may forget they are more than their suffering. This is where the question of identity begins to stir. Who am I, apart from what I endured? Who am I, if not the caretaker, the sensitive one, the guide? Without the wound, do I still have worth? Shadow gifts walk a fine edge between power and distortion. Used unconsciously, they can lead to burnout, to savior complexes, to cycles of giving without rest. Honored with awareness, they open the possibility of balance, using vision when needed, but also allowing the self to rest in ordinary humanity. For it is not only the gift that matters, but the hand that holds it. True mastery of these shadow-born abilities comes not through constant use, but through knowing when to lay them down. To live only as a healer or seer is to live half a life. The deeper invitation is to weave the extraordinary with the ordinary, to notice visions, yes, but also to savour a meal, laugh with friends, or rest without vigilance. Perhaps this is why mystics often remind us that light is born from shadow. But shadow is not the whole story. The gift awakens, yes, but so does the responsibility to integrate it, to use it without losing oneself. Otherwise, the very sensitivity that once protected the soul may become the chain that binds it. So the awakening of shadow gifts carries both wonder and weight, always circling back to a single inquiry. Who am I beneath the roles I've carried? The search for the lost self. The path does not end with awakening gifts. Once the shadows have turned to strange light, another longing emerges, the quiet ache for the child who never had room to exist. Not the child of memory, but the living pulse of innocence, tenderness, and vulnerability that still waits within. The journey begins not with answers, but with questions that unsettle the heart. Who was I before fear shaped me? What laughter was silence before it could bloom? What softness did I bury to survive? These questions do not demand quick solutions. They are doors, and opening them takes courage. It is often in the moments when we stop striving to heal that the child makes themselves known, slipping through in laughter, tears, or the sudden tenderness we cannot explain. Every so often the journey starts from a small beginning, a forgotten song that stirs tears, a childhood toy kept in a box, suddenly glowing with meaning. Even the scent of rain on warm soil can awaken a memory of play, reminding the soul of something it once knew but lost along the way. Mystics across time have whispered that the divine is not far from this return. In Hindu thought, there is Lila, the play of the gods, creation itself seen as a dance of joy. To find the lost self is to rediscover that life is not only a struggle for survival, but also a game of wonder. What was broken by necessity is slowly healed by play, not as escape but as sacred restoration. Modern psychology reminds us that play is not a luxury but a developmental need, and when it is denied, the adult must labour to restore it through intentional acts of wonder. A strange resistance often rises here. Many adults feel embarrassed at the thought of play, as if imagination were beneath the seriousness of life. Yet the gospel once offered a different wisdom. Unless you become like little children. The teaching was not about immaturity, but about remembering the doorway, trust, openness, the fearless capacity to love without defense. At certain points it feels as if the search leads only through ruins. The child within is not always smiling. Sometimes they're found in silence, crouched in corners of memory, carrying grief that was never spoken. Meeting them requires tenderness, for they hold not only joy but also sorrow, and still, the act of sitting with them, without rushing, without forcing, becomes its own kind of prayer. Reuniting with the lost self is not always gentle. It can stir anger, grief, or even resistance, for the child often returns carrying the weight of everything they were denied. There is power in reclaiming what was once abandoned. Vulnerability, once seen as weakness, becomes a fountain of empathy. Softness, once buried, becomes the soil where compassion grows. And innocence, though scarred, begins to glow again, not as naivete, but as wisdom dressed in gentleness. The search also teaches humility. It reveals that healing is not about building higher walls or becoming untouchable. It is about learning how to live with cracks, how to let light enter the places once hidden. The lost self does not return to make us invincible, it returns to make us whole. In quiet moments, you may notice the child stirring in subtle ways, a sudden curiosity, a laugh you didn't expect, a moment of awe at something ordinary, the way sunlight filters through leaves, the sound of a bird hidden in branches. These are not accidents, they are signals. The child within is finding language again. As this reconnection deepens, something remarkable shifts. The adult and the child no longer feel like separate beings. They begin to walk together, sharing vision, sharing breath. The one who endured hardship brings strength, and the one who was silenced brings wonder. Together they form a new kind of self, tender yet resilient, open yet grounded. This is where the journey grows luminous. To play, to feel, to dream as an adult is no longer foolishness, but devotion. The lost self does not return to pull you backward. It comes forward, asking to be carried into the present, into every step of the unfolding path. And the further you walk, the clearer it becomes that the child within does not only belong to you, it belongs to life itself, waiting to guide the next turning of the soul. The child who returns as the teacher. The child who once hid in silence, who learned to carry weight too soon, does not disappear forever. Somewhere deep within, that child waits, not as a ghost of the past, but as a guide toward wholeness. When the adult begins to listen, the long-buried voice of innocence returns, not fragile anymore, but carrying the strange wisdom of survival. Life has a way of circling back. What was denied in youth becomes the very thing one is driven to seek in adulthood. Tenderness, play, trust. These return as callings rather than memories, as though the soul is reminding itself of its original promise. The search is not about reclaiming what was lost, but discovering how to walk forward with the child who never stopped waiting. The rediscovery often feels foreign at first, as though meeting a stranger with your own eyes. The child's voice may sound softer than the noise of survival, yet it carries a strange authority. What was once dismissed as weakness now appears as a hidden compass, quietly guiding toward what was always essential. Now and then, it arrives in silence, without force. A moment of laughter shared with a stranger, a song that makes the body sway without permission, or a quiet evening where tears finally bring peace. Other times it comes like fire, breaking apart old structures, demanding the adult to shed layers of armor. In that burning, the soul discovers its resemblance to the phoenix, reduced to ashes, yet never destroyed, only waiting to rise again. Mystics across cultures have whispered of this rebirth. Khalil Gibran wrote that sorrow carves the vessel that may hold more joy, and the one who has suffered early carries a deeper vessel than most. It is within this hollow space that light pours in, not because life became gentle, but because the wound prepared the soul to hold both darkness and dawn. To embrace this paradox is to step into the rhythm of life itself. Joy is never pure sunlight, and sorrow is never endless night. Together they weave the strange twilight where wisdom grows, and in that twilight the adult and the inner child finally meet on equal ground. The wisdom that emerges from this journey is not theoretical, it is lived. Those who grew up too fast often become the ones others turn to in moments of despair, sensing a quiet strength that does not come from books but from walking through fire and finding air on the other side. Their very presence carries a subtle message. You are not broken for feeling pain. You are broken open, and something larger wishes to move through you. Transformation may soften the edges, but it cannot erase the ache of loss. The longing for an easier beginning never fully disappears, but instead of binding the soul, it sharpens compassion. It becomes the thread that allows them to see the child in others, the hidden burdens, the unspoken grief. What was once an isolated wound becomes a bridge. In healing themselves, many discover they are also healing an old wound carried by their family, or even by the culture that shaped them. Their journey becomes more than personal recovery. It becomes participation in something ancient, a repair of threads that were frayed long before they were born. This is why some say the soul chooses its path, not as punishment, but as preparation. The hardships of early years plant seeds that, though hidden for long seasons, eventually bloom into rare flowers: empathy, vision, resilience, creativity. The bloom does not erase the winter, but it proves that winter was never the end. The rediscovered child may return not as a bearer of wisdom, but as laughter itself, with play, with a reminder that spirit itself dances, that even the divine is not only serious but playful. To live from this place is to find holiness in the small, ordinary joys once overlooked. The lost self is never truly lost. It lingers in shadows, waiting to be welcomed back, not as a victim, but as a teacher. When the adult learns to listen to that voice, a circle completes itself. The one who grew up too fast becomes the one who shows others how to grow whole. Rather than ending in return, the journey moves into renewal, revealing that within every fractured childhood rests a seed of light, waiting to awaken. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this spoke to your heart, consider subscribing, sharing your thoughts below, and joining me for the next unfolding.